Hi again. Here it is Wednesday. I can't believe it's the middle of the week already. And we're Laura and Dave Butler of Work Life Consulting. And we're here for our Wednesday netcast. And we'll let you know what we're talking about in just a second. We'll be right with you. So we're in this together. And our topic today, I think, really sort of encompasses that whole theme of we're in this together. But first of all, as I said, Laura and Dave Butler of Work Life Consulting, and we provide customized online coaching programs that help individuals, teams, and leaders achieve greater fulfillment in their lives. Our services are tailored to fit your unique needs as we customize everything around individual coaching, virtual workshops, and keynote content. But today we're talking about unconscious bias and how to be aware of some of those invisible barriers that may arise from cultural assumptions.
Yeah.
One of my favorite words is assumptions, which I've got many myself. But when you start to break it down, and we'll see as we discuss our 5 tips for reducing bias in your own way of thinking, what we want to do is invite you to join our conversation. Let us know where you are. If you're listening to this as a replay, certainly indicate that this is you joining with a replay. We'd like to know that. And we invite you to continue in the conversation. So what are we getting at here, Dave?
Well, I think we have a tendency to talk about bias as if it's something outside of ourselves, when in reality, all kinds of bias starts right with us. They're not always negative biases. I'm not talking about racial bias or gender bias necessarily, but we have a bias for we think that we should eat at noon. I have my lunch at noon. Well, that's a bias. Some people have their lunch at 2 o'clock. Does that make them right or wrong? Or no, it's just different. The way we look at the world can be biased. Some people work all night and sleep all day. Do you call that a daytime shift or a nighttime shift? It all depends on how you look at it. Our can be very unique and very different, and that's what I mean by bias. We have our own unique way of thinking about things.
Yeah, and it's almost like people can provide us with the mirror of, when we may be engaging in one of those not so beneficial biases that hold not only us back, but hold others back. And there, as we all know, the conversation today is all about, I think, pulling off the Band-Aid with bias that has been in place for so many years. I mean, we grew up, we've been around the block a few times in this discussion, and how much we've seen change. But I remember, last night we were, and certainly over the past several years, we were talking with one of our sons about understanding what it was like for people of color back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Or even before then, before our time, it was even worse.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine that in the modern era, so to speak. I mean, I can remember going to college in 1968, 69. I went to visit a friend of mine down in Florida. He was at Florida Southern University. And we went to the student union, and there was actually a door for coloreds and a door for white. And I thought this was, Civil War time. We were talking 1968.
Yeah.
That'd still be there. They had different drinking fountains. The coloreds had a separate drinking fountain. So biases, linger. They stay in there, but they're very subtle sometimes. A good example of another bias is when people say, well, you know how Italians are. They talk with their hands. I've had a lot of Italian friends, and I can tell you they all talk with their hands. But you know what? They're not the only people who talk with their hands. I talk with my hands too. So it becomes sort of like a shorthand to talk about people in various ethnic backgrounds, various language backgrounds. It's a convenient way of putting things in the box.
Well, I think too, it's bias is one of the my favorite way to look at bias is through the way we think about things. So there's a tremendous diversity of thought. And what we want to do is opportunities to engage people in that diversity of thought. So if we look at step one is to focus on seeing people as individuals.
Right.
We can look at them outside of us. It's not always and somebody doesn't always have to think the way I do.
Right. Well, the point here is that we have a tendency to put people into boxes of social groups. Like those are old people. We're old people now. That's the younger generation. We're talking these generalities of people. Rather than saying that's Betty Johnson. She lives next door, and she's a younger generation person. But this is who she is. Look at people as individuals, not as just members of a social group.
Right. And then step two is to work on consciously changing what you believe. What has been developed.
Well, there's a lot of stereotypes. We see them on the television all the time. You see the gangsters, they always look a certain way. They always seem to be Italian. Well, not all gangsters are Italian. Those are stereotypes. We have stereotypes that get in our way of just being able to talk about people with disabilities, for example. Some really interesting group people that I've met that have various disabilities. But, the tendency is to stereotype them as being disabled. Well, no, they're able-bodied people, but they're differently able than I am.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes with my favorite phrase, which is replace judgment with curiosity.
Yeah, that's always good.
If we can step aside and focus on that and replace that way of thinking for a moment, I mean, it definitely works wonders because what it helps us do.
Well, certainly the most important thing is to be able to take time to pause and reflect. The amount of reflective time that people give themselves is so minute compared to what they do with, burning up the time, getting things done. If we could just simply give ourselves a chance to recharge. When you look at excellent athletes, for example, Olympic athletes are not constantly jumping over the high jump. They're practicing, they're resting, they're drinking water, they're thinking about it, and then it all builds up to them jumping the high jump. But they don't jump high jumps all day long. They may only jump 4 or 5 times, if that. The rest of the time, they're recuperating and recharging and renewing themselves.
Yeah, and I think it gives us, when we pause and reflect, it gives us a chance to look at replacing our point of view with something else. So I just want to remind people who may be joining us in the recording, please leave a comment and let us know, where has bias tripped you up in your life? What have you noticed yourself? Where maybe, step 4 kicks in, where you adjust your perspective.
And say to yourself, wait a minute, how am I looking at this? One of my favorite examples of this, Steve Covey in 7 Habits of Effective People, talks about the guy who's riding on the subway, and he notices over in the corner that there's a guy sitting there by himself is acting dejected. And he's got 2 kids with him, and they're acting up and making noise and making things really uncomfortable for everybody else. So at one point, the guy walks over and says, "Could you take care of your children, please? This is really rude of you." And the guy looks up and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. We're kind of lost. We just lost their mother. She died at the hospital, and we're on our way home." I mean, you want to talk about changing your perspective quickly?
That'll set you straight pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know what other people are going through, what their experience is.
Right. Well, it's just imagining walking in somebody else's shoes.
Well, I think replacing it with, like you said, replace judgment with curiosity. Let's ask first.
Right.
Before we make judgments.
And then the final one is increasing exposure. And I love this one because and this one really sets the stage for looking at ways to learn and grow about difference and other people through activities like sharing food that we may not be familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always a great way to do it, because all cultures, all ethnicities have different kinds of foods and the way that they use different foods, what those different foods mean to them and what they eat. I think that you can also increase your exposure by doing something as simple as going into a different kind of a church. You want to talk about differences in going to one Catholic church and then going to an African American ceremony is like a completely different world.
Right.
So open yourself up to these different exposures.
Right. And there's so much that we can take advantage of. It could be something online, based on what we've just learned about. I think too, with what we've all experienced through COVID, there's a tendency to understand each other differently. I've noticed that myself. It may not be perfect, and it may not be totally, we haven't broken the barrier completely.
But I think we've realized that it's possible for us to all be in something together. We are all in the pandemic together.
Right. Well, and I think too, it addresses the need for empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So empathy is certainly the key word around engaging in these topics of bias, which may be very prevalent or it may be unconscious. Quite often I've met with people who have been, somebody may have the ability to say to another person, what you did back there, blah, 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 point something out. And the other person is totally unaware.
Yes. Well, I think this is also a good example of where you can not only increase your exposure, but increase the exposure of other people. Try inviting them to your house for dinner. Try inviting them to go to a community event together. Just to be able to talk about the different approaches, different views. I think that there's so much opportunity we have in this great country we live in is really a country of all different kinds of people.
Right.
So right here in the street in front of us, we probably have 20 different backgrounds and 20 different opportunities for exposure.
So that's about all we have time for today. So please join us weekly. Let us know in the comments if there's anything in particular you'd like to talk about. We have enough going on that we'd be happy to share what we keep offering, but we'd love to hear from you. And if you're joining, as I said on the recording, please feel free to leave a comment. So stay tuned. Every Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we'll be here. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.